Welcome to Science for Sleepy, where we take the biggest questions in science and unpack them slowly, carefully, and with all the detail you need whether you are wide awake or drifting off to sleep. Tonight we ask a question that can unsettle even the calmest mind. What if we are not the first civilization on Earth? Here are some facts that may surprise you. Coal, the black rock that fueled the Industrial Revolution, takes millions of years to form. Yet miners over the past 2 centuries have occasionally claimed to find things like iron pots or even small chains sealed deep inside coal seams. If the coal is millions of years old, how could such objects be there? In Utah, a fossilized footprint looking eerily like a sandal was found pressed into rock that itself dated back hundreds of millions of years, supposedly even crushing a trilobite, a creature that went extinct long before humans were ever imagined. Are all of these stories hoaxes? Probably yes. But even if just one of them is not, the implications are enormous. Before we go further, I want to pause for a small request. Could you scroll down to the comments right now and tell us where in the world you are listening from and what time it is there? It is always fun for us to imagine this calm little community stretched across time zones. Some of you watching in the middle of the night, others in the middle of your lunch break. And while you are down there, if you have not subscribed yet, maybe hit that button. Think of it this way. If there really was another civilization millions of years ago, and they forgot to subscribe to survival, they disappeared. So let's not repeat their mistake. Subscribe, and you'll find us here again tomorrow with another video, because we post every single day. Now let us take this slowly. The Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old. Humans like us, modern Homo sapiens, have been around for maybe 200,000 years. Our written history is just a few thousand years old. That means our entire story is less than the last second on a 24-hour clock representing the age of Earth. Everything we know, our cities, our technology, our history lessons in school, is just the tiniest sliver of time. So is it really so impossible that another civilization once rose and fell long before us, so long ago that the planet itself erased every trace? Think of it like a chalkboard. You write something across it, and then you erase it. The marks may linger faintly for a while, but if you keep writing and erasing over and over, eventually the board looks clean again. The Earth does the same thing, only instead of chalk it uses stone, water, wind and fire. Mountains rise and then wear away. Oceans swallow coastlines. Volcanoes bury valleys. Ice sheets scrape the land down to bedrock. Over millions of years, entire continents drift, collide, and rearrange themselves. If a city once stood where there is now desert or ocean, what would remain? Almost nothing. We can see this even with civilizations we know. The ruins of the Mayan cities in Central America were swallowed by jungle in only a few hundred years. The Indus Valley civilization, one of the earliest in the world, was lost to history until archaeologists stumbled upon its remains in the 1920s. The city of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey was hidden under earth for thousands of years before being rediscovered in the 20th century. These are places built in stone, places that existed only a few thousand years ago, and yet they nearly vanished. Now stretch that thought to millions of years, and the silence becomes almost inevitable. Here is a dull but telling detail. Even our most durable materials do not last forever. Steel rusts. Concrete crumbles in less than 1,000 years. Glass eventually weathers back into sand. Plastic may linger for hundreds of thousands of years, but even it breaks down under heat and pressure. In 10 million years, most of what we build will be gone. In 100 million, it will be completely erased. The Earth's surface is simply too restless to preserve us. This leads us to something humbling. If another civilization did exist millions of years ago, the odds are stacked against us ever finding proof. The objects we sometimes hear about, footprints in ancient stone, artifacts in coal, are intriguing. But even if they were real, they are tiny sparks in an overwhelming darkness. Imagine trying to prove the existence of New York City 100 million years from now, if all that survives is one soda can buried in rock? Without context, it might just look like a strange mineral deposit, but still, anomalies exist. They may be hoaxes, they may be misunderstandings, but they keep appearing in old reports, in miners' tales, in scientific journals from centuries past. And even if 9 out of 10 of them are wrong, what if the 10th is not? So here is where I leave you at the end of this first part. When you think of Earth's vast age, billions of years stretching behind us, does it really make sense that we, with our fragile little history of a few thousand years, are the first and only civilization? Or are we just the latest, standing on ground that has carried forgotten worlds before us? When you look at the ground beneath your feet, it feels solid, dependable, unchanging. But that is an illusion. The truth is that Earth's surface is constantly moving, erasing, and rewriting itself. This is one of the main reasons we may never know if a civilization came before us. The very ground we depend on as an archive is the least reliable library imaginable. Think about how long it takes for a road in your own neighborhood to crack. Within only a few years, weeds push through. In a few decades, the surface begins to crumble. Now stretch that thought to thousands of years. The road vanishes entirely, leaving only faint traces. In 100,000 years, even those traces are gone. Now imagine millions of years. The rocks beneath you today may one day sink into the Earth's crust, melted down and reborn as new stone. This process is called plate tectonics. The Earth's outer shell is divided into giant slabs that slowly drift, collide, and sink beneath one another. Over millions of years, entire continents change shape. Mountains rise and wear down. Oceans appear and disappear. To put this in perspective, the Atlantic Ocean is only about 200 million years old. Before that, Africa and South America were joined together. If an advanced civilization had existed along their shared coastline back then, everything they built would now be scattered, swallowed, or buried beneath miles of ocean floor. Even the ocean itself does not keep good records. Most people think of the seafloor as permanent, but in truth it is young compared to the continents. The oldest seafloor today is about 200 million years old, far younger than the Earth itself. This is because ocean crust is constantly being created at ridges and destroyed at trenches. That means if a civilization had built cities on land that is now underwater, we would have no chance of finding them. They would have been recycled back into molten rock long ago. We can see the speed of erasure in more ordinary examples. The city of Pompeii in Italy was buried by volcanic ash in the year 79. For centuries, it lay hidden, perfectly preserved beneath the debris. But once excavated, the remains began to decay quickly, exposed to the air and rain. In less than 2,000 years, what the volcano protected is already vanishing again. Now compare that to 10 million years. Even stone is no match for time. Glaciers are another agent of destruction. During the last ice age, sheets of ice more than a mile thick scraped across North America and Europe. They ground mountains into rubble and carved valleys into the shape we see today. If there had been towns or cities beneath those glaciers, they would have been crushed and scattered like sand. No trace would remain except perhaps a few chemical hints buried deep in the soil. Erosion works more slowly but just as effectively. Wind and water wear away at everything. Think of the Sphinx in Egypt. For thousands of years, sand and weather have been carving away at its face. Even massive stone monuments designed to last become ghosts under the steady touch of wind and rain. If this happens in only a few thousand years, then in a few million, even the grandest construction becomes dust. It is worth pausing on something that sounds boring but matters deeply. The geological record. Scientists read Earth's history the way you read a book, by studying layers of rock. But this book is full of missing pages. In many places, entire chapters have been torn out, leaving gaps of millions of years. This is called an unconformity. It happens when layers of rock are eroded away or never deposited in the first place. Imagine trying to read a mystery novel when every other chapter is gone. That is what studying Earth's history is like. If a civilization left its mark in one of those missing chapters, we might never even know to look for it. Sometimes, the Earth preserves things beautifully, but only in rare conditions. Fossils are a good example. They form only when an organism is buried quickly, shielded from decay, and then slowly mineralized over millions of years. That is why fossils are precious but rare. For every one fossil we find, there are countless creatures that lived and died without leaving any trace. Civilizations would be no different. Unless preserved under just the right circumstances, their remains would disappear. We can test this idea by looking at what archaeologists call deep time trash. Human activity already leaves behind unique chemical signatures. For example, our burning of fossil fuels changes the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. Plastics, though fragile, can leave behind long-lasting chemical traces in sediments. Industrial pollution spreads heavy metals into soil and water. In theory, if another civilization had once industrialized, we might detect their presence not in buildings or tools, but in strange layers of chemistry locked inside rocks. This is called the Silurian hypothesis, named after a science fiction story but proposed seriously by scientists at NASA. It suggests that industrial civilizations might be detectable only by chemical scars, not by monuments. And this brings us to a humbling point. You may think of civilization as skyscrapers, bridges, and highways, but in the language of Earth, our real legacy will be boring things. Altered carbon levels, traces of plastic, artificial isotopes from nuclear tests. This is what the Earth records. These small, dull details are what will remain after millions of years, not the proud achievements we admire. So when we ask if we are the first, we must also ask, are we even looking in the right place? Instead of digging for statues or tools, perhaps we should be examining the chemical fingerprints in ancient rocks. If another civilization burned fuel, mined metals, or released chemicals, tiny traces might still linger hidden in the dull details of the geological record. And that leads to a quiet but troubling thought. What if those chemical anomalies have already been found, but written off as natural events? A spike in carbon levels might be explained as volcanic activity. Strange metals in sediments could be blamed on meteor impacts. Without context, how would we ever know the difference? Here is where I will leave you for now. If Earth erases almost everything, and if the only clues left behind are buried in chemistry and stone, how can we ever be certain that no civilization came before us? Or is it possible that the evidence is already there, sitting in plain sight, but disguised as something ordinary? Imagine for a moment that you are walking along a stretch of limestone in Texas. Beneath the hot sun, the rock is pale and cracked, and there, running across the surface, you notice something that should not exist. A series of prints shaped like human feet, complete with toes and arches, preserved side by side with the three-toed tracks of dinosaurs. That is what workers reported in the late 19th century near the town of Glen Rose. To believers, these prints suggested that humans and dinosaurs once walked together. To skeptics, they were simply misinterpreted dinosaur tracks, eroded into human-like shapes. The debate continues, but the story illustrates something bigger: how difficult it is to separate genuine anomalies from mistakes or wishful thinking. The Glen Rose tracks are not the only claim. In Utah, in the 1920s, a fossilized footprint was reported that looked like a sandal pressing down on a trilobite. Trilobites vanished more than 200 million years ago, long before humans appeared. The footprint, if genuine, would rewrite everything we know about history. Most geologists argue it is just an odd natural shape, a coincidence of erosion. Still, the image of a shoe crushing an ancient sea creature lingers in the imagination. Other stories come from coal mines. In Illinois, in the 1880s, A miner supposedly split open a lump of coal to reveal a delicate golden chain embedded inside. In Oklahoma, in the 1940s, miners claimed to find a small iron pot encased in solid coal. In each case, the coal was tens of millions of years old. Critics point out that contamination objects falling into cracks in the coal could explain such discoveries. Others suspect outright hoaxes, tales told to sell newspapers or to impress neighbors. Yet these stories keep returning, whispered through books and articles, feeding the sense that perhaps the Earth is hiding something. Even stranger reports surface now and then. In the Soviet Union, geologists in the 1970s described metallic spheres with grooves around them, discovered in layers of mineral deposits dated to hundreds of millions of years old. The objects looked like manufactured artifacts but were often explained as natural formations, the result of crystalline growth or geologic processes. The line between natural and artificial can blur when time has pressed and twisted matter for millions of years. What seems like craftsmanship might be nothing more than geology playing tricks. And this is where the real challenge lies. Science demands repeatable evidence. One artifact is not enough. It must be studied, documented, compared, and verified. But most of these mysterious discoveries vanish into private collections, or the circumstances of their discovery are poorly recorded. Without a chain of evidence, they remain little more than stories. A lump of coal with a pot inside is intriguing, but unless the pot survives in a museum where it can be examined, it becomes nothing more than rumor. Still, rumors can matter. They shape the questions we ask. They remind us that history is not always as tidy as we think, and they point to an uncomfortable truth. If another civilization did exist millions of years ago, its traces would not appear to us as grand monuments. They would appear exactly like these anomalies out of place. Strange, isolated, difficult to prove. Consider how archaeologists reconstruct the lives of ordinary people from the past. The most important evidence is rarely a king's palace or a giant statue. It is the dull fragments, broken pottery, burned seeds, worn tools. These things survive because they were common, not because they were special. Now imagine trying to find such fragments after tens of millions of years. Even a single piece would be extraordinary. And yet, when something unusual does turn up, like a metallic sphere or a footprint in stone, our first instinct is to doubt it. Perhaps that instinct is correct, but what if, once in a while, it is not? There is also a human side to these discoveries that we should not ignore. Many of the miners, quarry workers, and farmers who claimed to find strange objects were not scientists. They were ordinary people working long hours in difficult conditions. For them, a discovery was not just a curiosity, it was something to tell the family at dinner, something that gave meaning to their day. Their stories were passed on, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes misremembered, but at the core, there may have been a genuine spark. Dismissing all of them as foolish or dishonest risks, losing those sparks forever. We should also reflect on how our own civilization might appear to future discoverers. Imagine a miner, millions of years from now, finding a piece of plastic pressed into a layer of rock. Without context, it might look like a strange mineral vein. Imagine someone splitting open a stone to find a corroded fragment of a soda can. Would they recognize it as the product of a civilization, or would they dismiss it as a geological oddity? Perhaps they would tell stories of it, argue about it, and then quietly file it away as unexplained. Despite the John stars, this brings us to an important point. Anomalies alone are not enough to change the story of history, but they are enough to keep the question alive. Every strange footprint, every out-of-place artifact, is like a reminder that our knowledge of the past is built on fragile ground. The earth is vast, time is deep, and our evidence is limited. So, as you hear these stories of footprints beside dinosaurs, of chains in coal, of pots in stone, ask yourself, are these just errors and legends? Or are they the faint echoes of something older than we can imagine? If another civilization once walked this earth, is it possible that these small, strange finds are all we have left of them? Look around your room for a moment. The walls, the furniture, the objects you use every day, they feel solid, as though they will last forever. But if you zoom out to the scale of Earth's history, none of it will survive. Not the wood, not the metal, not even the stone. Everything you see is temporary, because the Earth does not keep still. It is not a quiet archive, but a restless recycling plant, constantly erasing and rewriting its surface. This is one of the main reasons we may never find clear evidence of any civilization older than our own. The engine behind this process is plate tectonics. Earth's outer shell is not one continuous piece, but a puzzle of giant slabs that float on molten rock. These slabs drift slowly, just a few inches every year, about the speed at which your fingernails grow. That sounds trivial, but over millions of years, it reshapes entire continents. Africa and South America were once joined together in a supercontinent. Now they are separated by an ocean thousands of miles wide. In another 100 million years, they may collide again. Imagine what happens to cities, monuments, or artifacts caught in this slow-motion dance. They are crushed, buried, or swallowed into the deep earth, never to be seen again. Even mountains, which seem eternal, are fragile when measured against time. The Himalayas, the tallest mountains on Earth, are still rising as India pushes into Asia. Yet geologists know that given enough millions of years, they will wear down into hills, then into flat plains. If an ancient civilization carved its achievements into the peaks of a vanished mountain range, those works would be long gone. What feels permanent to us is only a brief moment in the story of geology. The ocean floor is even less reliable as an archive. Most people imagine the seafloor as ancient and untouched, but it is actually younger than the continents. The oldest parts of the seafloor are only about 200 million years old. Compare that to the continents, which have rocks more than 3 billion years old. This difference exists because oceanic crust is constantly destroyed at deep-sea trenches, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another. If a civilization once lived on a landmass that later sank beneath the waves, everything it built would have been erased when that crust was recycled. In fact, the ocean floor is like an etch, a sketch, shaking itself clean every few 100 million years. Volcanoes provide another force of destruction. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79, it buried Pompeii and Herculaneum under meters of ash. For centuries, these towns were hidden, preserved only by accident. But volcanoes do more than bury, they also annihilate. Lava flows incinerate wood, stone, and metal alike. The intense heat reshapes everything. Over deep time, volcanic activity has resurfaced huge areas of the planet, turning whatever may have existed there into ash and magma. Glaciers also act as erasers. During the last ice age, massive sheets of ice, more than a mile thick, moved across North America and Europe. These glaciers acted like giant bulldozers, grinding rock, soil, and anything else in their path. If there had been towns, farms, or even entire cities beneath that ice, they would have been pulverized beyond recognition. When the glaciers melted, they left behind valleys, lakes, and bare rock, but no evidence of what might once have been. Then there is erosion, the quiet, steady hand of water and wind. The Grand Canyon in the United States is a monument to this power. Over millions of years, the Colorado River carved through rock nearly a mile deep, exposing layers that span nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history. Any structure built on that land before the canyon formed would have been washed away long ago. Even the hardest stone eventually yields. What makes this story even more striking is the idea of unconformities in geology. These are gaps in the rock record where entire layers are missing, erased by erosion or never deposited at all. Some unconformities represent tens or even hundreds of millions of years. That means that for those vast spans of time, we have no record of what happened on the surface of Earth. It is as if chapters of a book were ripped out, leaving only fragments of the story. If a civilization rose and fell during one of those missing intervals, we might never know. It helps to compare this with human history we do know. Think of the city of Troy. For centuries, people thought it was just a legend. When archaeologists finally uncovered its ruins in the 19th century, they found not one city, but 9, built one on top of another, each destroyed and rebuilt over time. That was just over a span of a few thousand years. Now scale that idea up to millions of years. How many Troys could be buried in Earth's shifting crust, hidden beneath layers that we may never dig through? And even when evidence does survive, it is fragile. The famous footprints at Lake Toli in Tanzania, left by early hominins about 3.5 million years ago, survived only because they were quickly buried by volcanic ash and protected from erosion. Without that accident, they would have been lost forever. That is how preservation works. It depends on rare coincidences, not guarantees. For every trace we have, countless others are gone. This is why the possibility of earlier civilizations cannot be dismissed out of arrogance. It is not about believing in wild conspiracies or science fiction. It is about acknowledging that the Earth is an imperfect historian. It remembers some things but forgets most. Our own existence is proof of how fragile memory is. Without careful preservation, without dumb luck, we too will vanish almost without a trace. So, here is where I leave you at the end of this part. If the Earth is constantly erasing and rewriting itself, how can we ever know for sure whether civilizations existed before us? And perhaps the more important question is not whether they did, but how many times the slate has already been wiped clean. When you think of lost civilizations, you probably imagine ruins in the jungle or crumbling temples in the desert. But what is striking is how easily entire cultures can vanish, not over millions of years, but within just a few centuries. Human history is full of societies that once thrived, built cities, traded, created art, and then disappeared so completely that we only stumbled upon their existence by chance. This fragility is a warning. If civilizations of just a few thousand years ago can nearly vanish from memory, what chance would a civilization from millions of years ago have? Take the Indus Valley civilization. Around 4,000 years ago, it was one of the most advanced societies on Earth. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro had sophisticated urban planning, straight streets, drainage systems, standardized bricks. In some ways, their organization seems more modern than other contemporary cultures. Yet when the civilization declined, it left behind almost no grand monuments like the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Instead, its ruins were covered by dust and soil. For centuries, people living in the region had no idea that beneath their fields and villages lay the remains of a forgotten civilization. It was not until the 19th century that archaeologists pieced together its story. Imagine how close it came to being lost forever. Or consider the Minoans of Crete. Around 4,000 years ago, they dominated trade across the Mediterranean. Their palaces were decorated with vibrant frescoes of dolphins and rituals, and they had an elaborate writing system. Yet when natural disasters and invasions brought their decline, their culture dissolved into the background of Greek history. For centuries, people thought of the Minoans only as legends, the stuff of myths like the labyrinth of the Minotaur. It was not until the early 20th century that archaeologists unearthed the Palace of Knossos and gave the Minoans their place in history again. Without that excavation, they might have remained a half-remembered story. The Maya of Central America give us another lesson. Their cities were vast, their astronomy advanced, their calendars precise. But when their civilization collapsed, the jungle reclaimed their monuments. Great stone pyramids were swallowed by trees and vines. By the time Europeans arrived, the Mayas' monumental cities were hidden. For centuries afterward, many assumed the forest had always been empty. Only in the 19th century did explorers begin uncovering the ruins, and even today, large parts of Maya history remain undeciphered. The jungle had almost succeeded in erasing a civilization that lasted for more than 2,000 years. Closer to our own time, there is the case of Great Zimbabwe. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, it was the center of a thriving culture in southern Africa, with stone walls and towers that still inspire awe. Yet when Europeans arrived, they could not believe that local people had built it. For a long time, they dismissed the ruins as the work of outsiders. In this way, not only can civilizations vanish physically, but their memory can also be stolen or denied. Great Zimbabwe is a reminder that history can be erased not just by geology or nature, but by human prejudice and neglect. These examples highlight something important. Discovery is fragile, and memory is fragile. Think about Troy again. For centuries, it was considered pure myth, a story told by Homer with no grounding in fact. Only in the 19th century did Heinrich Schliemann dig into a hill in Turkey and reveal that Troy was real. That means that for nearly 3,000 years, the world believed Troy was imaginary. If we can forget a city that still had ruins sitting above ground, how much easier would it be to lose one that had been buried, flooded, or recycled by the earth itself? It is also worth considering the details that tend to survive. Stone and clay endure, while wood and textiles vanish. That is why we know so little about the everyday lives of people in these societies. Their homes, tools, and clothing often decayed long ago. What we do find are monuments, pottery, inscriptions, objects made of durable material. This creates a distorted picture, making past civilizations seem grander and more alien than they really were. The ordinary, the fragile, the daily lives, all of that usually disappears. And yet, sometimes, even when traces remain, they lie hidden in plain sight. Farmers ploughing their fields in Mesopotamia once turned up ancient tablets without knowing what they were. Shepherds walking over hills in Central America stepped unknowingly on buried temples. Entire civilizations lay beneath people's feet, waiting for the right accident or curiosity to reveal them. If that is true for cultures just a few thousand years old, think about how unlikely it would be to ever stumble upon remains from millions of years ago. It is not only about material remains. Stories, too, can vanish. Oral traditions may preserve memories for centuries, even millennia, but eventually they fade or transform. The myths of Atlantis, El Dorado, or lost golden cities may be echoes of real places, distorted by time, or they may be inventions born of imagination. Either way, they remind us that even memory is unreliable. What one generation knows, the next may forget. Civilizations do not just disappear physically, they vanish from our minds. This raises a humbling thought. We live in a time where we document everything: photographs, recordings, digital files. But even these may not last. Paper burns, metal rusts, hard drives corrode, data becomes obsolete. Our own civilization might someday be known not by the vast archives we build, but by whatever happens to survive the accidents of time. If the Indus Valley, the Minoans and the Maya could almost vanish from history in a few thousand years, what hope do we have of lasting millions? So let me leave you with this thought. If history has already shown us how fragile memory is, how easily entire cultures can vanish in the blink of an eye, then what else might lie beyond our reach? Could civilizations older than we dare imagine have existed, erased not by lack of brilliance, but by the simple indifference of time? When you think of time, what scale comes naturally to you? Perhaps your own lifetime, 70 or 80 years if you are fortunate, or maybe the span of your family's memory, a couple of generations. History books stretch further, a few thousand years into the past, back to the dawn of writing. That feels vast already. But all of this, every dynasty, every empire, every invention, is only a thin layer of paint on the surface of Earth's timeline. The real scale of our planet is measured not in centuries or millennia, but in millions and billions of years. This is what geologists call deep time. Deep time is difficult to hold in your head. Imagine trying to count a single million seconds. It would take nearly 12 days. Now think of 1 billion seconds, it would take more than 31 years. Extend that idea to the age of Earth, which is about 4.5 billion years, and you start to see why human history is a blink of an eye in the story of the planet. Civilizations rise and fall in spans of centuries, maybe a few thousand years. Deep time swallows such intervals without effort. Think of the dinosaurs. They dominated the Earth for over 150 million years. To put that in perspective, humans with written history have been around for about 5,000 years. That is less than a rounding error in the timeline of the dinosaurs. And yet, for all their longevity, their world has nearly vanished. What we know of them comes mostly from bones, teeth, and a few impressions of skin and feathers in stone. Whole ecosystems, forests, rivers, and climates that lasted for millions of years are reduced to fragments. If an empire of dinosaurs once existed with tools, languages, and art, how likely would it be for us to know? The fossil record is selective and merciless. Here is another example. Imagine you are standing on a cliff, looking at layers of rock stacked one upon another. Each band represents a period of Earth's past sediments laid down over millions of years. To the untrained eye, they seem eternal, yet geologists know they are incomplete. Gaps exist, sometimes representing tens of millions of years. These gaps are called unconformities, and they are reminders that even stone, the very thing we expect to preserve time, has blind spots. Civilizations that might have risen during those missing intervals would leave no trace in the rock at all. The very forces that make Earth habitable are also the forces that erase its memory. Plate tectonics constantly recycle the crust, dragging old seafloor into the mantle and spitting up new rock through volcanoes. Erosion carries mountains into the sea, grain by grain. Climate cycles bury and unbury landscapes. In this churn, nothing stands still for long. Imagine writing a message in the sand at the beach. A single wave can wash it away. Deep time is like that. Only the waves are mountains, glaciers, and oceans. And the time scale is not minutes, but millions of years. To help visualize this, think about the oldest structures built by humans. The pyramids of Egypt are about 4,500 years old. Stonehenge is older, perhaps 5,000 years. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey may date back nearly 12,000 years. These feel ancient, almost eternal, yet in geological terms, they are brand new. If left untended, they will crumble completely in just a few more millennia. Extend the timescale to millions of years, and it is almost laughable to expect anything to remain. Stone turns to dust, metal corrodes into soil, even mountains are worn flat, and yet, deep time is not only a destroyer, it also preserves. Fossils prove this. A delicate fern leaf pressed into stone 200 million years ago, a fish frozen mid-swim, a tiny insect captured in amber. These are whispers of worlds that vanished long before humans appeared. Deep time erases broadly but keeps fragments, accidents of preservation that allow us to glimpse what was. The question is whether a civilization, with all its complexity and fragility, could ever leave behind such a recognizable trace. This leads to a sobering thought. Perhaps the greatest evidence of earlier civilizations would not be monuments or tools, but changes to the environment itself. Geologists today debate whether future scientists millions of years from now would be able to detect the Anthropocene, the age we are living in. What will mark our presence? Plastics buried in sediments, carbon shifts in the atmosphere recorded in ice, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing. If those are the signatures we leave behind, then perhaps similar markers might exist for civilizations before us. Chemical anomalies, unexplained deposits, or sudden changes in climate patterns. But here is the difficulty. Deep time overwhelms such signals too. Oceans circulate, rocks melt, ice comes and goes. A spike in carbon dioxide might vanish in the noise of countless other climate shifts. A thin layer of unusual minerals might be swallowed by tectonics. or buried too deep to find. Just as our ruins will likely vanish in a geological blink, so too would theirs. Consider also the scale of extinction events. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck Earth, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. That impact left a thin layer of iridium around the globe, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. It is one of the clearest markers in the geological record. But even here, interpretation was not immediate. Scientists debated the cause of the dinosaurs' extinction for decades before accepting the asteroid theory. If it is so challenging to decode an event as catastrophic as that, how much harder would it be to recognize the subtler marks of a vanished civilization? Deep time humbles us. It reminds us that we are temporary, that memory is fragile, and that even our greatest works may dissolve into dust. Yet it also stirs curiosity. If Earth's timeline is so vast and our own presence so brief, is it arrogance to assume we are the first? Could others have risen and fallen, leaving behind nothing but whispers swallowed by time? When people imagine the search for lost civilizations, they often think of archaeologists with shovels and brushes, carefully unearthing broken pots and crumbling walls. That image is partly true, but when it comes to asking whether advanced civilizations might have existed before humans, the search requires different tools. You cannot simply dig randomly into the Earth and hope to stumble upon a skyscraper from 50 million years ago. The methods must be more subtle, because what we are really looking for are traces, faint signals hidden in the geological record. The first clue scientists might look for is unusual chemistry in the rocks. This is because civilizations, especially industrial ones, leave fingerprints in the environment. Think about what our own society has already produced. Plastics, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and heavy metals are spread across soils and waterways. Nuclear testing in the 20th century released radioactive isotopes that settled into sediments worldwide. If you were to dig into layers of mud deposited in the 1950s, you would find tiny markers of humanity's presence, embedded invisibly in the earth itself. So, if there had been an earlier civilization, scientists reason it might have left similar chemical fingerprints. Perhaps an unexplained spike of carbon dioxide or methane in the atmosphere, preserved in ice or rock. Perhaps a thin layer of rare elements scattered across the globe. Or perhaps sudden shifts in soil composition that suggest the large-scale use of agriculture or industry. In fact, this approach has led some researchers to study events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, about 55 million years ago, when carbon levels suddenly spiked and global temperatures soared. Was it purely natural, or could it have been influenced by something else? Most scientists lean toward natural causes, but the very act of asking shows how the search must be conducted. Another place scientists look is in the fossil record. Civilizations, like species, alter the environment. Farming changes the land. Urbanization affects animal and plant distributions. Industrial activity leaves scars in ecosystems. If you look at modern Earth, you see this everywhere. Invasive species spreading across continents, forests cleared, river courses altered. If an earlier civilization existed, it might have left behind similar disruptions, sudden changes in which species thrived, or odd absences in the record of life. But here lies the challenge. Nature itself is chaotic. Climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts all cause massive disruptions that can look very similar to human activity. Distinguishing between natural upheavals and artificial ones is like trying to tell whether a footprint in the sand was made by a person or just shaped by the tide. The further back you go in time, the blurrier the picture becomes. This is why some scientists have proposed focusing on technofossils. A technofossil is any object created by technology that might persist long after its makers are gone. Today, examples include plastics, glass, aluminum, and even concrete. These materials are not naturally occurring in the same forms we use them, and in theory, some of them could last for millions of years under the right conditions. Imagine a fragment of glass, buried deep in sediments, waiting to be discovered by a geologist millions of years in the future. Would they recognize it as artificial, or would they mistake it for a natural mineral? Still, the odds are slim. Most plastics degrade quickly when exposed to sunlight and water. Metals corrode, concrete crumbles. For something to last across millions of years, it must be buried rapidly in a stable environment, shielded from erosion, heat, and pressure. That means the survival of technofossils would be rare, accidental, and uneven. Which brings us back to the sobering point. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we have not yet found a trace does not mean it never existed. There are also indirect methods of searching. For instance, scientists study climate records preserved in ice cores and sediments. They look for anomalies that cannot easily be explained by natural cycles. If, for example, a sudden global warming event occurred without a clear cause, like volcanic eruptions or orbital shifts, it might raise questions. Similarly, researchers examine mass extinctions for patterns. Could some extinctions have been triggered not by natural forces, but by the actions of intelligent beings? Again, the evidence is ambiguous, and interpretation is tricky. It is also worth noting that archaeology itself is young. Only in the past 2 centuries have we developed systematic ways of studying the past. Before that, ruins were often looted, ignored, or misinterpreted. Even today, vast areas of Earth remain unexplored. The Amazon rainforest, the Sahara Desert, the deep ocean. These places may still conceal human history just a few thousand years old. If we are still struggling to uncover our own past, what chance do we have of finding traces of civilizations that might have lived tens of millions of years ago? Think, too, about how much of the Earth is hidden beneath the oceans. More than 70% of the planet's surface lies underwater. And as we said earlier, ocean crust is young, constantly destroyed and renewed. If an advanced civilization once flourished on a landmass that later sank, its remains would likely have been recycled into the mantle long ago. Even today, most of the ocean floor has not been mapped in detail. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own seabed. All of this points to a frustrating truth. The search for ancient civilizations is not like looking for buried treasure. It is more like listening for faint echoes in a storm, knowing that most of the sound has already been drowned out. Scientists must be cautious, skeptical, and rigorous, but also imaginative enough to consider possibilities. The lack of clear evidence today tells us little, because the odds of survival across deep time are stacked against us. So, perhaps the better question is not whether we will find evidence, but whether we could ever recognize it if we did. Would we even know what we were looking at? Could we mistake artificial signals for natural ones, just as people once mistook fossils for odd rocks or mythological curiosities? History shows us that interpretation is as fragile as discovery, which leaves us with a quiet, unsettling thought. If the tools of science are limited, if the Earth erases its past so thoroughly, and if recognition itself is uncertain, then how can we ever be sure that we are the first? For as long as people have been telling stories, they have been telling stories about lost worlds. You find them in every culture, in every corner of the globe, tales of civilizations that rose to greatness and then fell, swallowed by water, fire, or time. These myths are not proof of anything that actually happened millions of years ago, but they do show something important. The human imagination has always been drawn to the idea that we are not the first. Perhaps the most famous example is Atlantis. The story comes from the philosopher Plato, writing in the 4th century before Christ. He described a great island civilization, powerful and wealthy, that grew arrogant and was eventually destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, people have speculated about Atlantis. Was it real, a memory of an ancient society erased by disaster? Or was it only an allegory, a parable invented by Plato to teach about pride and downfall. Whatever the case, the myth has endured, showing how compelling the idea of a vanished civilization truly is. But Atlantis is not unique. Flood myths appear around the world. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a great deluge that wiped out humanity, sparing only one man who built a boat. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah survives a similar flood. In Hindu tradition, Manu is warned by a fish about rising waters and builds an ark. In Native American stories, in tales from Africa, in the myths of Pacific Islanders, you find echoes of the same theme. Again, this does not mean these stories are literal records of global floods, but they may preserve memories of real disasters, like the flooding of river valleys or the rising seas after the last ice age. Memory blends with myth, and myth with imagination, until the line between history and storytelling is blurred. Legends of lost golden ages also appear again and again. The Greeks spoke of an earlier time when humans lived closer to the gods, free from toil and suffering. Hindu cosmology describes cycles of ages, yugas, where humanity rises and falls, reaching peaks of virtue before sinking into corruption. The idea is not of one civilization, but of repeating civilizations, each erased and replaced. These stories reflect an intuition that human history might not be linear, but cyclical, repeating itself endlessly. Even when myths seem fantastical, they sometimes carry kernels of truth. Take the story of Troy. For centuries, people thought it was purely legendary, until excavations in the 19th century revealed its ruins. Or consider how indigenous oral traditions in Australia describe landscapes that match coastlines as they existed more than 7,000 years ago, before rising seas submerged them. These examples remind us that myth is not always invention. Sometimes it is memory stretched across generations, preserved imperfectly but not without value. If we apply this lens to stories of lost civilizations, it becomes harder to dismiss them outright. They may not describe literal past worlds in detail, but they do suggest that humanity has always sensed how fragile civilization is, how easily it could be erased. Atlantis, golden ages, floods, all these stories reflect the same fear, that greatness is temporary and that what feels permanent can vanish overnight. It is also worth considering why these stories endure. Partly, they are cautionary tales. They remind us of human hubris, of the dangers of pride, greed, or neglect. But they also speak to something deeper, a recognition that time is vast and our memory is short. We tell stories of lost civilizations because we know, instinctively, that things have been forgotten before. If we can forget the lives of our own grandparents within a few generations, how much more could be lost over thousands or millions of years? Even today, modern myths about ancient astronauts or vanished super-advanced societies capture people's imaginations. While most of these ideas are speculative and not supported by evidence, their popularity shows that the question continues to haunt us. We long to believe that we are not alone in history, that others have walked this path, and perhaps left something behind for us to find. But the danger lies in misreading myth as literal history. Just because a story speaks of a great flood does not mean it records an actual worldwide deluge. Just because Plato wrote of Atlantis does not mean it existed in the Atlantic Ocean. The challenge is to recognize the value of myth as a cultural memory without confusing it with direct evidence. Myths may not prove the existence of earlier civilizations, but they keep the idea alive, generation after generation. This raises an interesting question. What myths are we creating today? What stories will our descendants tell, thousands of years from now, about us? Will they remember the internet as a golden age of connection, or as a tale of hubris that led to downfall? Will they imagine our world as a paradise lost, or as a cautionary tale? Just as we interpret myths of the past, so too will future generations interpret myths of us. So, as you listen to these old stories, Atlantis, floods, golden ages, ask yourself, are they pure imagination, or are they distant echoes of realities long erased by time? And if they are only imagination, what does that say about us? That we have always needed to invent lost worlds to make sense of our own fragile existence. Imagine looking at the Earth from space. From above, continents appear solid and permanent, oceans vast and empty. But that perspective is deceiving. Beneath dense forests, beneath cities, and beneath oceans, the surface of our planet holds secrets, traces of landscapes that have been buried, eroded, or reshaped over centuries and millennia. For archaeologists and geologists today, modern technology has become a kind of superpower, allowing them to peer into places that were previously invisible. One of the most powerful tools in this search is satellite imagery. Satellites can capture subtle differences in vegetation, soil moisture, and elevation that the human eye cannot detect from the ground. For instance, ancient roads, foundations, or irrigation channels can affect how plants grow above them. Even if the stone itself has eroded, the imprint in the soil remains. In the Middle East, archaeologists have used satellite images to uncover hundreds of previously unknown ancient settlements in areas that were thought to be empty desert. These are traces that would have been impossible to detect from the ground alone. Ground-penetrating radar is another tool that allows scientists to see beneath the surface without digging. By sending radio waves into the ground and analyzing the reflections, researchers can detect anomalies that might indicate walls, chambers, or buried structures. This technology has revealed hidden features beneath famous sites like the pyramids of Egypt, as well as previously unknown towns in Europe and Central America. The key advantage is that it is non-invasive, nothing is destroyed, and even delicate layers of soil or sediment remain intact. Sonar and submersible vehicles extend this exploration to the oceans. Most of the Earth's surface lies underwater, and the seabed is largely unexplored. Sonar can map the ocean floor in detail, revealing structures that might be natural but could also be shaped by intelligent activity. In the Mediterranean, sonar mapping has uncovered sunken cities and harbours, some dating back thousands of years. Off the coast of India, archaeologists discovered what appears to be a submerged city near Dwarka, described in ancient texts. The ocean, once thought to be an impenetrable barrier, is slowly yielding its secrets through technology. LIDAR, or light detection and ranging, is another breakthrough. LIDAR systems shoot pulses of light from airplanes or drones and measure how long it takes for them to bounce back. This allows scientists to create precise three-dimensional maps of the landscape, even through dense forests. In the jungles of Guatemala, LIDAR revealed that the Maya had far larger and more complex cities than previously known. Entire networks of roads and terraces appeared, hidden beneath centuries of vegetation. LIDAR has transformed our understanding of human impact on landscapes, showing us that civilization often leaves subtle but detectable traces, even in places we thought were wild. Even with these tools, the challenge remains enormous. Detecting modern human settlements is relatively easy, but what about civilizations that might have existed millions of years ago? Geological processes, erosion, and plate tectonics have rearranged the continents multiple times. Any structures, roads, or cities from such civilizations would have to survive burial, crushing, and chemical transformation. And yet, the principles behind these technologies, detecting anomalies, mapping hidden patterns, and reading indirect clues remain the same. They show us how we might recognize traces of past activity, even when direct evidence has disappeared. Consider also the role of deep-sea exploration. Submersibles can now reach depths of several kilometers, photographing and sampling areas that were once entirely inaccessible. Underwater ridges, cliffs, and plains reveal sediment layers that record climate events, catastrophic floods, and sudden changes in ecology. Some researchers speculate that if any advanced civilization existed in the distant past, its settlements might have been near coastlines, which are the first areas to be submerged by rising seas. The oceans may hold some of the last remnants of human or pre-human activity, hidden beneath layers of silt and sand. Remote sensing does more than locate structures. It can also reveal environmental changes that suggest intelligent manipulation of landscapes. Ancient agriculture, deforestation, irrigation systems, and mining all leave subtle traces in soil chemistry and terrain patterns. By comparing these patterns with natural baselines, scientists can detect anomalies that suggest human or intelligent activity, even if no physical artifact survives. This is one of the ways researchers are beginning to think about detecting civilizations on a scale of millions of years. Look not for perfect ruins, but for subtle alterations to the environment that could only have been made by intelligent beings. There is also a fascinating overlap with astronomy. Scientists searching for civilizations beyond Earth rely on similar principles. They cannot see cities on exoplanets, but they can detect anomalies in light patterns, atmospheric composition, and energy use. This astroarchaeology mirrors what geologists and archaeologists are doing here on Earth. If we can identify signs of civilization from light years away, might we not also recognize faint signatures of lost civilizations beneath our feet, buried by deep time and geological processes? Yet, for every discovery, there are countless false positives. Nature produces patterns that mimic human activity. A natural ridge can look like a road. A cluster of stones might appear as ruins. Erosion, volcanic activity, and sediment shifts create forms that deceive the eye. This is why interpretation is crucial. Finding something unusual is not the same as proving it is artificial. Scientists must be methodical, cautious, and skeptical, balancing curiosity with the rigor of evidence. Even with these limitations, modern technology has transformed our ability to explore the invisible. Landscapes that were once inaccessible, lost beneath forests, deserts, or oceans, are now being revealed in astonishing detail. Every hidden ruin uncovered, every sediment anomaly studied, adds to our understanding of how civilizations rise, spread, and disappear. These discoveries show that while the odds of finding a civilization millions of years old are small, it is not impossible to imagine ways in which subtle traces might survive. So here is the quiet lesson of this exploration. The Earth is full of hidden layers, invisible to the casual eye. Technology allows us to see these layers, to detect anomalies, to reconstruct histories that might otherwise remain lost. And yet, despite all this, the deeper we look, the more we realize how fragile evidence truly is. What is preserved is only a whisper. What is gone is nearly absolute silence. Which brings us to an open question. If our satellites, sonar, and LiDAR are revealing hidden cities and ancient landscapes from just a few thousand years ago, could there be patterns buried so deep, erased by time, that they hint at civilizations far older, so old that we may not even recognize them as the work of intelligence? In science, anomalies are the breadcrumbs that lead to questions no one knew to ask. They are the moments when the evidence does not quite fit the expected pattern. In archaeology, geology, and paleontology, anomalies can be frustrating because they challenge the neat narrative of history. Yet they are also deeply fascinating because they hint at possibilities beyond what we currently understand. When we think about civilizations that might have existed before us, it is anomalies that provide the most intriguing and unsettling clues. Consider first the fossil record. Fossils are the primary evidence for life in deep time, and they tell a story of evolution, extinction, and survival. Most of the time, the record is consistent, showing a gradual progression of species. But occasionally, we find fossils that seem out of place. These out-of-place artifacts, or OU parts, include items that appear to contradict established timelines. Some examples are controversial, and many have mundane explanations, but their very existence sparks questions. Could they represent traces of unknown intelligence? One famous example involves tools. Stone tools are well documented throughout human prehistory, but a handful of discoveries suggest the use of tools far earlier than expected. Fossils of ancient hominins in Africa are sometimes found with cut marks or shapes that resemble deliberate modification, dating back millions of years. Most researchers interpret these as natural breaks or coincidental fractures, yet they provoke the question, what if some form of intelligence existed long before Homo sapiens? Could there have been beings capable of shaping their environment in ways we have not yet fully recognized? There are also strange metal artifacts found in contexts that seem impossible given the surrounding age of sediments. In Russia and South Africa, reports exist of metal objects discovered in layers dated tens of millions of years old. Many of these finds are debated, dismissed as natural inclusions or misidentifications, but the allure remains. An object of advanced manufacture in a layer of rock older than any known civilization challenges the standard story of human history. Even if most of these anomalies are ultimately explained, their persistence in the record reminds us how incomplete our knowledge truly is. Fossilized footprints offer another area of intrigue. Laetoli in Tanzania preserved hominin footprints from roughly 3.5 million years ago, astonishing in their detail. But occasionally, researchers report footprints or impressions that do not match known species, or that appear in unexpected geological contexts. Are these errors in dating, misinterpretations, or hints of something unknown? There is no consensus, only the reminder that our understanding of the past is built on fragments. Geological anomalies also play a role. Consider sudden spikes in carbon or other elements in sediment layers, sometimes associated with mass extinctions or climate upheavals. Some researchers have speculated that these could result from industrial activity by unknown civilizations. The idea is speculative, and mainstream science attributes most anomalies to natural events such as volcanic eruptions or asteroid impacts. Yet the pattern is intriguing. For every perfectly understood event, there is another that raises eyebrows, where the cause is uncertain and the evidence ambiguous. Then, there are structures that appear natural but might be artificial. Erosion can create astonishingly regular shapes, but occasionally these shapes hint at design. Straight lines, uniform blocks, and geometric arrangements occur rarely in nature. If discovered in isolation, they might be interpreted as mere coincidence, but if they were combined with other anomalies, they could suggest intelligence. The problem is that in deep time, such evidence is almost always ambiguous. Rocks move, continents shift, and time wears away precision. What remains is only a vague trace, a shadow of what might have been. Even modern examples teach a lesson. In the deserts of Egypt and Sudan, massive stone formations were long assumed to be natural, until careful study revealed them to be remnants of ancient settlements. In the jungles of Central America, massive mounds and terraces were hidden for centuries beneath vegetation, indistinguishable from the landscape without detailed mapping. If civilizations of a few thousand years ago can be hidden in plain sight, what might be concealed from us by millions of years of geological activity? Meteor impacts provide another layer of mystery. Large impacts can erase or obscure entire regions, leaving only subtle chemical traces. If a civilization existed near one of these sites, it might have been obliterated completely. The evidence could survive only in small fragments, distorted layers of sediment, unusual isotopes, or tiny artifacts scattered and buried beyond recognition. Even a catastrophic event that would erase nearly all traces leaves whispers in the rocks. Detecting and interpreting these whispers is a delicate science, and the margin for error is enormous. Paleobotanical evidence adds to the intrigue. Sudden changes in pollen deposits or tree rings can indicate rapid deforestation or agriculture, even in prehistory. Normally, these shifts are attributed to climate change, volcanic activity, or animal grazing. Yet the possibility exists, however remote, that some changes could have been influenced by intelligent activity. Agriculture leaves distinct marks in soil chemistry, in the distribution of certain species, and in sediment layers. The challenge is separating natural fluctuations from potential interventions. Finally, consider what is missing. The fossil and geological records are incomplete. Entire epochs leave no discernible trace of complex life or activity. For civilizations attempting to exist in these gaps, the odds of survival in the record are vanishingly small. Yet gaps also create space for imagination, for hypotheses, for careful exploration. Science thrives on such questions, even when definitive answers are impossible. So here is the lesson of anomalies. They do not prove the existence of prior civilizations. They may never do so. Most will have natural explanations, and many are simply errors in interpretation. But they illustrate how the Earth's history is full of puzzles, hints, and shadows. They remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially over millions of years. For every anomaly, there is a story not yet told, a possibility not yet eliminated, which leads to the quiet, unnerving thought: if anomalies continue to appear, strange fossils, out-of-place artifacts, unusual chemical signatures, then how many other signals have already vanished completely, swallowed by time and tectonics, leaving no trace at all? Could there be civilizations hidden in the gaps, existing only in whispers buried in stone and sediment, waiting for someone, someday, to notice them? When we look at the story of human civilizations, patterns emerge. Societies rise, grow, reach peaks of power and complexity, and then decline, sometimes gradually, sometimes catastrophically. Even the most monumental achievements can vanish with startling speed, leaving behind only fragments for future generations to interpret. This fragility reminds us that, in a world shaped by natural forces and human decisions alike, no civilization is truly permanent. Take the Roman Empire, for example. At its height, it stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, a network of cities, roads, aqueducts, and laws that endured for centuries. Yet the empire ultimately fragmented. Cities fell into ruin, roads crumbled, aqueducts dried, and knowledge was lost or scattered. Much of what we know today comes from surviving texts, inscriptions, and the occasional artifact, often discovered centuries later by accident. Had these been destroyed or overlooked, the empire could have vanished almost completely from history. The Indus Valley civilization offers another cautionary tale. Around 4,000 years ago, it was astonishingly advanced, with urban planning, drainage systems, and standardized bricks. Yet after its decline, it disappeared from memory. For centuries, local populations farmed over its ruins, unaware of the sophisticated society that once existed beneath their feet. It was only in the 19th century that archaeologists began piecing together its story. Imagine how easily this civilization might have been forgotten entirely. The Maya of Central America also demonstrate the vulnerability of civilization. Their cities were once immense, filled with monumental architecture, complex calendars, and sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. Yet, when political and environmental pressures caused societal collapse, the jungle reclaimed their cities. Even centuries later, early European explorers assumed the forests were empty. Without meticulous archaeology and remote sensing technologies, much of Maya history would have remained invisible. What these examples reveal is that the disappearance of a civilization often leaves very little behind. Monuments may endure for a time, but nature relentlessly reclaims them. Buildings collapse, rivers shift course, vegetation covers roads. Knowledge can vanish even faster, especially if it is recorded on perishable materials like wood, paper, or textiles. Even civilizations that lasted thousands of years can leave only whispers in the archaeological record. Sometimes, collapse is sudden and catastrophic. Consider Pompeii, buried in ash during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79. The city was frozen in time, preserving an extraordinary amount of detail about daily life. Yet a few centuries later, knowledge of Pompeii was largely lost, remembered only in legend until rediscovery. Catastrophes like this demonstrate both the fragility of human achievement and the chance that certain events can erase entire societies almost overnight. Gradual decline is no less effective at erasure. Societies that weaken over centuries may slowly vanish, their cities falling into ruin, their knowledge fading as fewer people maintain it. The Western Roman Empire is a prime example. Its collapse did not happen in a single day, but over decades. Yet by the time new powers arose, many former achievements were forgotten or misunderstood. Roads fell apart, aqueducts stopped functioning, libraries were lost. Civilization can disappear in layers, leaving only faint traces for posterity. Even civilizations that were relatively recent can nearly vanish from memory. Consider the Kingdom of Aksum in modern Ethiopia and Eritrea. Flourishing between the 1st and 7th centuries, it controlled trade routes across Africa and Arabia, minted coins, and built impressive monuments. Yet knowledge of Aksum largely disappeared from European consciousness until rediscovery in the 19th century. Monuments crumbled, inscriptions faded, and the society was largely forgotten outside its region. This illustrates how the passing centuries are ruthless in erasing even remarkable achievements. The lesson here is that permanence is an illusion. No matter how sophisticated, no matter how enduring a civilization seems, natural forces and human neglect will eventually erase it. Cities collapse, forests reclaim farmland, erosion sweeps away roads. Knowledge stored in texts, if not continuously preserved, disappears in the same way. If this is true for societies just a few thousand years old, how much more likely is it that older civilizations, millions of years in the past, would leave virtually no trace at all? There is also the element of human perception. Sometimes civilizations do leave artifacts, but they are ignored, misinterpreted, or attributed to myth. The ruins of Troy, long thought to be fictional, lay hidden until the 19th century. The Mayas' extensive road networks and terraces were obscured by jungle for centuries. Without careful observation, documentation, and analysis, even substantial evidence can go unrecognized. The disappearance of a civilization is therefore both physical and perceptual. Environmental change is another powerful eraser. Floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and climate shifts can obliterate settlements and make regions uninhabitable. River deltas shift, coastlines submerge, deserts expand. The effects of climate and catastrophe on human societies are evident in the fall of the Akkadian Empire, the abandonment of cities in the American Southwest, and the decline of settlements along the Indus River. Entire cultures can vanish, leaving the environment altered, but human activity erased. Interestingly, some civilizations vanish so thoroughly that their knowledge survives only in fragments or echoes. The Minoans of Crete, for instance, had advanced art, architecture, and writing. Yet by the time the Mycenaeans rose, much of their civilization was gone. Only through archaeology did we recover knowledge of the Minoans' sophistication. This partial erasure shows how difficult it is to reconstruct past societies and how easily an entire civilization can be nearly lost to history. The pattern is clear. Civilizations, no matter how mighty, are vulnerable to disappearance. Their longevity does not guarantee permanence. Human ingenuity and achievement can vanish beneath the soil, buried by natural forces or forgotten as knowledge fades. If this is true for civilizations only a few thousand years old, then the possibility of much older, entirely lost civilizations becomes conceivable. Time is a ruthless editor, removing nearly everything and leaving only fragments, whispers, and anomalies. So the question arises: if the greatest empires of recorded history can vanish almost completely, how many others might have existed before us, erased entirely by nature and time? Could there be civilizations so ancient that no ruins remain, their existence hinted at only by subtle chemical anomalies, unusual sediment layers, or faint echoes in myth and legend? When you think of a civilization, you probably imagine cities, roads, agriculture, and eventually industry. For most of human history, This progression happened gradually, but in the modern era, industrial activity became transformative on a global scale. Factories, mining, transportation, and energy consumption reshaped landscapes, altered atmospheric chemistry, and left unmistakable markers in soil and ice. Now, imagine a similar industrial civilization existing long before humans millions of years ago. What evidence might it leave behind, and how could we detect it? Industrial civilizations are unique because their impact is not limited to artifacts like buildings or pottery. They manipulate their environment on such a scale that the Earth itself bears the signature of their activity. Consider carbon emissions. Human industrial activity since the 18th century has dramatically increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, leaving distinct spikes preserved in ice cores and sediment layers. If a pre-human civilization had used fossil fuels, burned forests, or engaged in large-scale metallurgy, it might have caused similar anomalies. Detecting these spikes requires careful chemical analysis, but they could, in principle, survive for millions of years. Beyond carbon, other chemicals might linger. Industrial activity releases heavy metals, plastics, and synthetic compounds into the environment. Plastics persist for centuries, some types longer, and certain chemicals do not occur naturally in significant concentrations. These markers act as fingerprints of intelligent manipulation of the Earth. If similar signatures existed in the deep past, they would be faint and rare, but detectable with modern geochemistry. The challenge is differentiating them from natural events, volcanic emissions, or asteroid impacts, which can produce similar anomalies. Energy use also reshapes landscapes. Mining, deforestation, and urbanization leave scars that last long after buildings crumble. Even today, abandoned industrial sites are identifiable from satellite imagery decades after they are deserted. Multiply this over millions of years, and the physical traces of cities would mostly vanish. Yet large-scale modification of landscapes, terraces, canals, smelting sites might leave chemical or sedimentary evidence long after the structures themselves have disappeared. Subtle shifts in soil composition, unusual erosion patterns, or changes in sediment deposition could hint at past activity. The hypothetical industrial civilization raises another question. How long could such a society persist before it altered the environment enough to endanger itself? Human civilization faces similar challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, and ecological disruption threaten to reduce our impact over time. A pre-human industrial society might have burned through its resources, triggered environmental collapse, or been wiped out by natural catastrophes. If it ended abruptly, its ruins might be buried and distorted beyond recognition, leaving only chemical whispers in the geological record. One avenue scientists explore is the study of so-called technofossils, artifacts or materials that could persist for millions of years. Today, metals, concrete, glass, and certain plastics serve as technofossils. Over geologic time, most will degrade, but some fragments might survive, trapped in sedimentary layers or buried deep underground. Identifying these in the ancient record would be extraordinarily difficult, especially if the civilization existed millions of years ago and natural processes had recycled much of the crust. This line of thinking leads to a startling implication. The deeper we probe Earth's past, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish natural events from artificial ones. For example, a spike in carbon dioxide might be attributed to volcanic activity, but could it be an industrial signature? Sudden changes in forest composition might reflect climate shifts, but could they also reflect large-scale agriculture or deforestation by intelligent beings? These are the questions that keep scientists both fascinated and cautious. Evidence, over millions of years, is often ambiguous, and interpretation requires a careful balance of imagination and rigor. Consider also the scale of energy consumption needed to leave a global signature. Even a civilization limited to a single continent, using fossil fuels or large-scale metallurgy, could alter local environments in ways detectable in the sedimentary record. Oceans absorb atmospheric carbon, rivers transport chemicals, and glaciers trap gases in ice cores. If the civilization was widespread, the signals could reach a global scale, potentially leaving subtle but detectable traces visible to geochemists today. Yet, the odds are daunting. Plate tectonics, erosion, sedimentation, and subduction recycle the Earth's crust constantly. Ocean basins fill and empty, mountains rise and fall. Over tens of millions of years, even a civilization that left a global chemical signature could vanish almost entirely. Only careful, targeted analysis of ancient sediments, ice, and rocks could reveal hints, and even then, the interpretation would be uncertain. There is also the consideration of technology and lifestyle. Could a pre-human civilization have developed energy sources similar to ours? Could it have built infrastructure, mined metals, or synthesized chemicals? We do not know. Evolutionary history suggests that the development of complex intelligence capable of industrial activity is extraordinarily rare. But rarity does not mean impossibility. Deep time is vast, and even extremely improbable events can occur given millions of years. Some scientists have suggested modeling what an industrial civilization would leave behind to better recognize anomalies in the geologic record. By simulating energy use, pollution, deforestation, and chemical deposition, they can predict what a pre-human Anthropocene might look like. These models focus on detecting long-lasting changes, not the civilization itself. Unusual isotopes, synthetic compounds, global carbon shifts, and massive landscape alteration. It is a subtle search, relying on inference rather than direct observation. The idea of industrial civilizations in deep time challenges our assumptions. It forces us to consider the fragility of memory, the impermanence of even the most advanced societies, and the possibility that Earth may have hosted intelligence before humans. It also demonstrates why absence of evidence is not definitive. If a civilization existed millions of years ago and left only chemical, sedimentary, or isotopic traces, we might be studying them today without recognizing what they are. Perhaps the most sobering realization is that our own civilization might someday leave similar traces, only fragments surviving geological processes to puzzle future intelligences. Ice cores may hold our carbon, plastics may linger in sediments, and isotopes from nuclear activity may persist in rock layers. Our own brief presence could be a whisper in the vast, ongoing story of the Earth, easily lost and nearly invisible to future observers. Which brings us to an open question. If it is possible for an industrial civilization to exist and vanish, leaving only faint chemical and environmental markers, then how many such civilizations could have arisen in Earth's deep past, only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind mysteries buried in stone, sediment, and ice, waiting for someone, someday, to notice? The Earth is a planet of extremes. Beneath its serene surface, it is constantly reshaped by forces that operate on scales far beyond human comprehension. Volcanoes erupt with devastating power, asteroids strike with explosive energy, and ice ages advance and retreat over millennia, reshaping continents. These forces have shaped the history of life itself, and they would have posed an existential threat to any civilization, no matter how advanced, that tried to survive here. Consider asteroid impacts. A sufficiently large asteroid can release energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs, triggering wildfires, tsunamis, and a nuclear winter effect that blocks sunlight for months or even years. Such an event could destroy cities, obliterate infrastructure, and collapse ecosystems that sustain civilization. The impact that contributed to the extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago is a dramatic example. More than 75% of species vanished, leaving only those capable of surviving drastic environmental change. If a civilization existed before humans, an asteroid impact of sufficient scale could have wiped it out entirely, leaving behind only the faintest chemical or geological traces. Supervolcanoes represent another form of global-scale threat. When one erupts, it can eject thousands of cubic kilometers of ash and magma into the atmosphere, triggering prolonged climate disruption. Agricultural systems collapse, temperatures drop, and sunlight is blocked. The eruption of Toba, approximately 74,000 years ago, cooled the planet for years and may have caused a genetic bottleneck in early humans. For any civilization, such an event would be catastrophic, potentially erasing cities, knowledge, and infrastructure almost overnight. Unlike a gradual decline, these catastrophes act suddenly and universally, leaving only buried sediments and isotopic anomalies as evidence. Ice ages are slower but equally transformative. Glacial periods cover vast swaths of the Earth in ice, grinding mountains, reshaping rivers, and displacing ecosystems. Civilization cannot survive under miles of moving ice, and regions once hospitable can become uninhabitable for thousands of years. Even temperate zones are affected by shifts in climate, forcing populations to migrate or adapt rapidly. Over millions of years, multiple ice ages have advanced and retreated, erasing surface evidence and leaving only hints buried beneath glaciers and sediments. If pre-human civilizations existed, ice ages could have buried them under layers of ice, only to melt away long after their demise, erasing almost all physical evidence. Flooding from rising seas compounds the problem. Coastlines are dynamic, and low-lying civilizations are especially vulnerable. After the last ice age, melting glaciers caused global sea levels to rise by more than 100 meters over thousands of years. Entire coastal settlements would have been submerged, leaving little more than disturbed sediment and occasional artifacts to hint at human or pre-human activity. Modern archaeologists face similar challenges today, discovering sunken cities in places like the Mediterranean or the North Sea, remnants of societies lost to rising waters. In deep time, entire civilizations could vanish in this manner, leaving only the faintest traces. Earthquakes and tectonic activity also play a significant role. Continents are not static, they drift, collide, and fold. Mountain ranges rise, valleys collapse, and ocean basins open and close. Civilizations built on these shifting landscapes are at constant risk. Cities buried under earthquakes, buried under landslides, or displaced by river course changes can disappear entirely from the surface record. Over millions of years, tectonics recycles the crust, subducting regions under molten mantle and erasing nearly all evidence of what once existed. Even the most durable human constructions, like pyramids or concrete structures, would not withstand millions of years of geologic processes. Erosion, pressure, chemical reactions, and movement of tectonic plates reduce even massive structures to faint mineral traces. Imagine an entire industrial city buried for 50 million years. Steel corroded, concrete crumbled, glass melted or dissolved, and roads ground down to sediment. The signals that survive would be subtle anomalies, detectable only through sophisticated geochemical or geophysical analysis. Catastrophes are indiscriminate. Unlike wars or internal collapse, natural disasters can annihilate a civilization regardless of its technological or military power. They are sudden and global, leaving very little for future generations or future archaeologists to reconstruct. Consider a hypothetical pre-human civilization wiped out by a supervolcano or asteroid. Its cities crushed, archives incinerated, farmland buried under ash. Over millions of years, erosion and geological activity would erase most physical structures. The chemical fingerprints might linger in sediments, isotopic anomalies, or unusual mineral deposits, but interpretation would be fraught with uncertainty. Even smaller disasters, repeated over time, accumulate into profound erasure. Droughts, floods, wildfires, and storms reshape landscapes and redistribute sediments. Evidence of human or pre-human habitation can be swept away in years or decades. Multiply these processes over millions of years, and what remains is astonishingly scant. The deeper we look into Earth's past, the more fragile the record becomes, like whispers in a storm. Consider also that catastrophes can trigger secondary effects that further erase traces. A volcanic eruption might trigger flooding or landslides. An asteroid impact might ignite fires, collapse infrastructure, and alter climate patterns. Ice ages can grind entire mountain ranges and forests into gravel. These cascading effects multiply the difficulty of preserving evidence. Even sophisticated civilizations would leave nearly nothing behind, their accomplishments reduced to subtle chemical or isotopic anomalies buried deep in sediments. One implication of this is sobering. The absence of clear evidence does not mean absence of civilization. The Earth is a harsh editor, rewriting its own history relentlessly. Civilizations may have existed, flourished, and disappeared entirely without leaving monuments or texts to remind us of their presence. In deep time, even the traces we would normally consider durable stone, metal, glass are unlikely to survive intact. Catastrophic events ensure that most evidence is destroyed, leaving only faint whispers detectable with modern technology. So the larger lesson is this: if civilizations are fragile even over a few thousand years, and catastrophes operate on global scales over millions of years, then it is not only possible, but plausible that civilizations arose and fell before humans, leaving almost no recognizable evidence behind. Their story might be recorded only in faint isotopic shifts, minor chemical anomalies, or subtle sedimentary disturbances, clues so small that we are only beginning to learn how to detect them. Which brings us to a haunting question. If Earth has been shaped by catastrophes capable of erasing entire species, ecosystems, and civilizations, how many intelligent societies might have existed before us, vanished without a trace, and left the planet almost entirely silent on their existence? The possibility of civilizations existing before humans challenges more than archaeology. It challenges how we think about history itself. History is usually framed as a human story, a linear progression from primitive societies to modern nations. But deep time is vast, stretching hundreds of millions of years, and our species occupies only a tiny fraction of it. The notion that intelligent, industrial-scale beings might have existed before us forces us to confront the limits of our perspective and the impermanence of knowledge. Science is built on evidence, yet the further back in time we go, the thinner that evidence becomes. Fossils are incomplete, sediments are disturbed, and chemical signatures are subtle. Our methods are precise but limited. We cannot recover the entire past, only interpret the fragments we find. This makes the question of pre-human civilizations both tantalizing and frustrating. Even if such civilizations existed, detecting them would be extraordinarily difficult, and interpreting the faint traces would require extraordinary caution. Philosophically, this possibility challenges human exceptionalism. The idea that intelligence and civilization are unique to our species. If intelligence arose before humans, evolved to manipulate the environment, and perhaps even develop technology, then our story is not the first chapter but one in a long, interrupted narrative. We would be inheritors, not pioneers, of civilization on Earth. The notion reshapes how we perceive progress, innovation, and the fragility of societies. Our achievements may be temporary echoes in a world that has seen others rise and fall long before we appeared. It also reframes the concept of time. Millions of years are difficult to imagine. 1,000,000 years is roughly 83,000 human lifetimes. If a civilization existed 5 million years ago, it might have flourished, collapsed, and been forgotten long before humans ever evolved. The Earth does not remember in ways we intuitively understand. Geological processes, erosion, and environmental change act as editors, erasing stories that took millennia to unfold. Human history, by contrast, is almost instantaneous in the planet's memory. The hypothesis also affects how we view intelligence itself. Intelligence is often assumed to be a rare outcome of evolution, emerging only under specific conditions. Yet the deep past was full of life forms, some of which might have evolved problem-solving abilities, complex social structures, or environmental manipulation skills. Even if these species did not develop technology as we know it, the possibility that some form of advanced cognition could have existed forces us to broaden our definition of civilization. We must consider intelligence as a process that could leave traces in subtle ways, through environmental impact, artifacts, or even chemical signatures. Scientific inquiry into pre-human civilizations is necessarily interdisciplinary. Geology, paleontology, archaeology, chemistry, and astronomy all intersect in the search for evidence. Researchers study isotopes in rocks, sediment layers, and fossilized plant matter for anomalies. They examine chemical deposits for signs of industrial activity. They analyze erosion patterns, changes in river courses, and landscape modifications for subtle traces of intelligent manipulation. And yet, all of this work is constrained by the incompleteness of the record. Every piece of data must be weighed carefully, and every interpretation carries uncertainty. This uncertainty is both a challenge and an opportunity. It invites creative thinking within rigorous scientific frameworks. It encourages us to ask questions we might otherwise dismiss. Could sudden changes in atmospheric chemistry millions of years ago hint at intelligent activity? Could unusual patterns in sedimentation or isotopic anomalies reveal industrial-scale manipulation? Could myths, fossils, and chemical evidence converge to suggest stories older than humanity itself? These questions push the boundaries of inquiry while remaining grounded in observation and reasoning. There is also a humbling aspect to this hypothesis. Human civilization often assumes permanence, believing that our cities, technologies, and knowledge will endure. Yet even the most monumental achievements, pyramids, aqueducts, or libraries, are vulnerable to time and nature. Considering pre-human civilizations reminds us that permanence is an illusion. Empires vanish, ecosystems collapse, and what seems enduring is ephemeral. The Earth itself is patient. It outlasts species, landscapes, and even civilizations. We are, in the grand narrative, a brief flicker. Another implication is moral and philosophical. If intelligent civilizations have risen and fallen before us, then our survival is not guaranteed. History, both human and geological, is full of abrupt changes and catastrophic events. Understanding the fragility of civilizations should encourage us to reflect on sustainability, environmental stewardship, and the choices we make today. We may be part of a continuum of civilizations, each testing the limits of existence, each leaving only faint traces behind. Our responsibility, then, is not only to preserve knowledge for ourselves, but to ensure our civilization endures long enough to leave a lasting, interpretable legacy. The hypothesis also enriches our imagination and cultural perspective. Myths of lost cities, great floods, and vanished empires are more than storytelling devices. They may echo a deep human intuition about the impermanence of societies. Considering pre-human civilizations bridges myth and science, showing that stories, speculation, and rigorous investigation can coexist. They remind us that the unknown past is vast, and that our curiosity about it is both ancient and profoundly human. Ultimately, the idea of pre-human civilizations challenges us to reconsider our place in the universe. We are not necessarily the first, and we may not be the last. Our achievements, our knowledge, and even our failures exist within a context far larger than ourselves. The Earth has seen complexity rise and fall countless times. What matters is what we choose to notice, preserve, and investigate before it too fades from the record. So here is the lingering thought. If Earth has hosted civilizations before us, lost to time and catastrophe, then what we see today is only a snapshot, a fleeting glimpse of life's potential on this planet. The past is a vast ocean, mostly hidden beneath layers of rock, ice, and sediment. and our understanding is just beginning to skim the surface. Every discovery, every anomaly, every whisper in the rocks may bring us closer to understanding whether we are truly the first or just the latest in a long hidden story of intelligence on Earth. Which leads to the profound question: if civilizations have existed before us, erased almost entirely by time, catastrophe, and geological processes, what does that mean for how we understand history, intelligence, and our responsibility as the current stewards of the Earth? As we reach the end of this journey, through time and possibility, it's worth pausing to consider what we've explored. The idea that civilizations might have existed before humans is extraordinary, but not inherently impossible. From anomalies in the fossil and geological record, to subtle chemical traces, to the impermanence of human achievement, the Earth itself provides hints that make us question the linear narrative of history we often take for granted. Think back to the discoveries that shape our understanding of past civilizations. Remote sensing reveals cities hidden beneath forests, beneath deserts, and beneath the ocean. LIDAR, satellites, sonar, and ground-penetrating radar allow us to detect human impact invisible to the naked eye. In these cases, evidence is often subtle. Changes in vegetation, soil composition, or topography. If civilizations a few thousand years ago can be hidden so thoroughly, what might civilizations millions of years ago leave behind? The traces would be even fainter, yet the methods we have today offer a small but growing ability to detect them. Consider the anomalies in the fossil record and unusual artifacts. Out-of-place tools, unexplained metallic objects, and isotopic anomalies challenge conventional timelines. Some are likely misinterpretations, and others may be natural phenomena. But collectively, they hint at the incompleteness of the record and the vast possibility space that lies in deep time. The Earth preserves fragments, not complete narratives, and sometimes those fragments do not fit neatly into our expectations. They invite curiosity, cautious speculation, and further investigation. The story of human civilizations provides a sobering lesson. Empires rise and fall, often leaving only whispers behind. The Romans, the Maya, the Indus Valley Civilization, and countless other societies demonstrate how quickly even the most sophisticated achievements can vanish. Natural forces, erosion, floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions erase landscapes. Knowledge stored on fragile media decays or is lost entirely. If our civilizations, which we assume are monumental, can be reduced to faint traces over mere millennia, the possibility of pre-human civilizations disappearing over millions of years becomes plausible. We also reflected on industrial-scale societies and what they might leave behind. Energy use, resource extraction, and environmental manipulation all create signatures detectable in the geological record. Even today, humanity leaves behind chemical fingerprints, isotopic shifts, and technofossils. If similar industrial activity occurred millions of years ago, the evidence might be present but subtle, hidden within sediments, buried under ice, or altered by tectonic processes. The record is incomplete, but the potential signals exist, waiting for the right questions and tools to reveal them. Catastrophic events, asteroids, supervolcanoes, and ice ages amplify this impermanence. Civilizations can be wiped out almost entirely, leaving only faint environmental hints behind. Even highly advanced societies are vulnerable to sudden global disruptions. Over deep time, these catastrophes have reshaped the Earth countless times. The absence of clear evidence for pre-human civilizations could be explained by such events, which leave the planet largely silent. The Earth's memory is selective and often unforgiving. Philosophically, these possibilities invite us to reframe our understanding of intelligence and civilization. Humans are not necessarily the first stewards of industry or knowledge. Time is vast, and even extraordinary achievements can be transient. This perspective is humbling, reminding us that the narrative of progress is fragile, and that our role is temporary within a much larger, almost unknowable history. Intelligence, societal complexity, and technological development may be rarer than we assume, but rarity does not equate to impossibility. Myth and culture also provide subtle echoes. Ancient stories of lost cities, floods, and vanished civilizations might reflect deep time intuitions, collective memories, or symbolic interpretations of natural events. While not direct evidence, these narratives highlight the human awareness of impermanence and loss. Perhaps they are cultural artifacts of the same uncertainty that modern science investigates, the recognition that what seems permanent may vanish, leaving only stories, whispers, or faint traces behind. Science and imagination intersect here. Careful study, rigorous methodology, and cautious interpretation are essential, yet speculation drives inquiry. Asking whether civilizations could have existed before humans is not abandoning reason. It is extending curiosity into deep time, exploring possibilities that challenge assumptions without disregarding evidence. We examine anomalies, search for subtle patterns, and use technology to detect signals almost invisible to the human eye. Every discovery nudges the boundary between what we know and what we can only imagine. As we consider the possibility of past civilizations, one truth becomes clear. Human history is but a single frame in the vast cinematic reel of Earth's deep past. Millions of years have passed before our species existed, and millions more will follow. What we see today, cities, forests, oceans, is a fleeting snapshot. Civilizations may have risen and fallen without leaving monuments, texts, or artifacts easily recognized. The Earth is patient, reshaping, erasing, and preserving selectively, allowing only glimpses of the extraordinary complexity that may have existed long before humans. Perhaps the most profound takeaway is humility. If civilizations have existed before us, we inherit a world with deep, layered history. Our achievements, knowledge, and environmental impacts are temporary markers, one of many attempts at intelligence and adaptation on this planet. Recognizing this encourages careful stewardship, curiosity, and an appreciation for the fragility of civilization. Our story is a continuation, not a beginning, and our actions may determine whether we leave whispers, echoes, or near silence for future generations to interpret. So, as you reflect on the possibility of pre-human civilizations, consider the vastness of time, the impermanence of achievement, and the fragility of evidence. Contemplate the faint signals that might remain beneath sediments, ice, and oceans. Imagine cities lost to rising seas, industrial activity erased by tectonics, and knowledge dissolved by time. Our understanding of the past is limited, but that limitation is itself a reminder of the vast potential for discovery, wonder, and humility. And here is the final question to leave with you, lingering like a shadow across deep time. If Earth has hosted civilizations before humans, their existence almost entirely erased by catastrophe, time, and the slow reshaping of the planet, then what traces of their stories might still be waiting to be found? And what does that possibility tell us about the resilience, fragility, and ultimate impermanence of our own civilization?